Sometimes the smallest act of kindness happens in a place where nobody is looking, and somehow it changes everything. The Red Line train rattled through downtown Chicago just after 7 in the morning, its steel wheels screaming against the tracks as another wave of commuters packed themselves into the crowded cars. Outside, cold rain streaked across the windows in silver lines, turning the city into a blur of grey buildings and glowing traffic lights. Inside, nobody spoke. Most people stared at their phones. Others held paper cups of coffee like lifelines. Elena Bennett stood near the center pole, one hand gripping the overhead rail, while her work bag rested against her hip. 26 years old and already exhausted, she had been awake since 5. Her shift at the rehabilitation clinic started in less than 40 minutes, and she still needed to stop for breakfast. The train jerked suddenly. A few passengers stumbled. Someone sighed. Someone else muttered under their breath. Then the doors opened at the next station and more people poured in. That was when Elena noticed the elderly woman. She couldn't have been younger than 68 or 70. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back. A dark blue coat hung from her shoulders. One hand held a small leather purse while the other gripped the rail with visible effort. Nobody moved. Nobody offered a seat. The train started moving again. The woman swayed slightly as the car rocked. Elena watched a young businessman glance up from his phone before immediately looking back down. Another passenger pretended not to notice. The old woman smiled politely as though she expected nothing from anyone. Elena felt something tighten inside her chest. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward. The elderly woman blinked in surprise. "Oh, sweetheart, that's kind of you. It's no problem." Elena smiled and moved aside. The woman settled into the seat carefully. Around them, life continued without interruption. Screens glowed, headphones remained in place. Nobody seemed to care, yet for some reason, the woman's eyes stayed fixed on Elena. There was warmth there, gratitude. But something else too, something thoughtful, almost curious. The train rolled through another tunnel. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Elena stood for the next 20 minutes, balancing herself through every turn and stop. Eventually, the woman spoke again. "Long day ahead?" Elena laughed quietly. "There you work in healthcare?" The woman nodded toward the employee badge, clipped to Elena's jacket. "Physical rehabilitation clinic. Helping people heal. Trying to." The woman's smile deepened. "The world needs more people like that." Elena looked away, slightly embarrassed. "I think the world just needs more people willing to stand up once in a while." The elderly woman chuckled softly. It sounded genuine, familiar somehow, the kind of laugh that belonged to someone who had seen a great deal of life. A few stations later, the train slowed again. The woman rose carefully from her seat. "This is my stop." Elena offered her hand automatically. The older woman accepted it. For a brief moment, their eyes met. "Thank you, Elena." Elena frowned slightly. She hadn't introduced herself. Then she remembered the clinic badge. "You're welcome." The woman stepped toward the doors. Just before leaving, she paused. The crowded train seemed strangely quiet around them. "Never let this city convince you that kindness doesn't matter." Then she disappeared onto the platform. The doors slid shut. The train continued forward. Elena watched through the rain-speckled window as the woman stood beneath the station lights. For a moment, she thought she saw a black SUV waiting near the curb outside, but the train pulled away too quickly to be certain. By the time she reached work, the encounter had nearly slipped from her mind. Patients needed attention, paperwork piled high, hours passed. The day moved on. What Elena didn't know was that less than 5 miles away, inside the back seat of a waiting vehicle, the elderly woman was looking at a photograph she had quietly taken that morning. The image showed a tired young woman standing on a crowded train after giving away her seat to a stranger. The older woman studied the photo for several seconds before handing her phone to a man seated across from her, a man wearing a charcoal suit. A man whose calm expression rarely changed, a man known by powerful people throughout Chicago. He glanced down at the photograph once, then a second time. "Who is she?" he asked. The elderly woman smiled faintly as the city drifted past outside the tinted windows. "That," she said softly, "is the young woman I want you to find." 3 days later, Elena Bennett had almost convinced herself that the woman from the train was nothing more than a pleasant memory. Life had a way of burying small moments beneath larger responsibilities. The rehabilitation clinic was busier than ever. Phones rang constantly, patients filled the waiting room. Insurance forms seemed to multiply every time she looked away from her desk. By Thursday afternoon, she was helping an elderly patient complete a set of balance exercises when the front door opened and a familiar voice drifted through the reception area. "I hope I am not too late for my appointment." Elena glanced toward the entrance and immediately froze. The silver hair, the warm smile, the same blue coat. It was the woman from the train. The older woman stood near the reception desk, holding a small purse while one of the clinic assistants searched the appointment schedule. Elena blinked in surprise. The woman noticed her almost instantly. Recognition brightened her face. "Well, look at that," she said warmly. "It seems we meet again." Elena could not help smiling. "I was thinking the same thing." The assistant finally located the appointment. "Maria Moretti?" she asked. "That is me, dear Elena," quietly repeated the name in her mind. Maria Moretti. Somehow it suited her. The older woman was scheduled for a routine mobility assessment, nothing serious. Still, when another therapist was unexpectedly pulled into an emergency consultation, the clinic manager asked Elena to handle the appointment instead. Maria seemed delighted by the coincidence. The evaluation room overlooked a busy Chicago street. Rain clouds had finally disappeared, allowing pale afternoon sunlight to spill through the windows. Maria sat comfortably in the examination chair while Elena reviewed her paperwork. "Everything looks pretty good," Elena said after completing several simple tests. "Honestly, you move better than many people 10 years younger." Maria laughed softly. "Do not tell my son that. He already worries too much." "Your son sounds protective. That is one word for it." The answer carried an odd note of amusement. Elena noticed it but did not press further. Over the next 30 minutes, the conversation drifted naturally. Maria asked about the clinic, about Elena's work, about her grandmother. None of the questions felt intrusive. Somehow they felt genuine, like conversations shared between old friends rather than near strangers. At one point, Maria watched Elena help another patient navigate a difficult stretch of hallway. Her expression softened noticeably. "You really care about people, do you not?" Elena shrugged. "I try. Most people say that." Maria's eyes lingered on her for a moment. Very few actually mean it. Before Elena could respond, the appointment ended. She printed several exercise recommendations and handed them over. Maria accepted the papers but seemed strangely reluctant to leave, as though she was waiting for something. Finally she stood. "Thank you for your help, Elena. You are welcome." Maria smiled again. "I have a feeling we will see each other soon." The comment felt oddly specific. Elena opened her mouth to ask what she meant, but the older woman had already started toward the exit. Curious, Elena followed a few steps behind. Through the clinic's glass doors, she watched Maria step onto the sidewalk. Then she saw it. Parked at the curb was a black SUV so polished it reflected the entire street like dark glass. The vehicle looked completely out of place among the aging sedans and delivery vans surrounding it. A driver in a tailored suit immediately stepped forward and opened the rear passenger door. Elena stopped walking, her eyebrows lifted. Maria climbed inside without hesitation. The door closed. Seconds later, the SUV pulled away from the curb and disappeared into traffic. "Who exactly was that?" Elena whispered. The question lingered long after the vehicle vanished. Unfortunately for her, the answer was much closer than she realized. Less than a mile away, inside a private office overlooking the Chicago River, a man sat behind a desk made of dark walnut. The city skyline stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Reports covered part of the desk. Business contracts occupied another section. Yet his attention remained fixed on a single photograph. The image showed a young woman standing inside a crowded train car. Vincent Moretti studied the picture quietly, then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. From his mother. She had sent only 4 words. A faint smile touched Vincent's face, not a large smile, not even a happy one. More like the expression of someone discovering something unexpected. He picked up the photograph again. Outside, evening shadows began creeping across the city. Inside the office, Vincent looked at Elena Bennett's image for several more seconds before speaking a single sentence. "Keep an eye on her." And at that exact moment, without realizing it, Elena's ordinary life moved one step closer to a world she had never imagined existed. The human mind has a strange way of noticing patterns only after they begin repeating. Elena Bennett first saw the man with the black umbrella on a Monday morning. Chicago's weather had shifted again overnight. Cold wind pushed through downtown streets while low clouds hung over the skyline like a gray ceiling. Elena left her apartment carrying a paper cup of coffee and a bag filled with patient files she had taken home over the weekend. She hurried toward the train station, barely paying attention to the crowd around her. That was when she noticed him. A tall man stood across the street holding a black umbrella despite the fact that it was not raining. His dark coat moved slightly in the wind. He seemed to be looking in her direction. Elena glanced away almost immediately. By the time the traffic light changed and she looked back again, he was gone. The moment felt insignificant. Chicago was full of strangers, full of people passing through each other's lives without ever exchanging a single word. Yet 2 days later, she saw him again. This time outside a grocery store near her grandmother's apartment. Elena had just finished carrying 2 bags of groceries to her car when she caught sight of a familiar silhouette reflected in the store window. The same umbrella, the same dark coat, the same calm posture. Her heartbeat quickened slightly. She turned around. The man stood nearly 50 feet away near a newspaper stand. Before she could get a better look, a city bus rolled between them. When it moved on, he had vanished again. Elena tried laughing at herself during the drive home. Maybe it was not even the same person. Maybe her imagination was connecting details that had nothing to do with one another. Unfortunately, the feeling refused to disappear. By Friday, she noticed herself scanning crowds more often, looking twice at reflections, watching intersections longer than necessary. Then came the third sighting. The rehabilitation clinic had finally quieted after a difficult afternoon. Most of the patients had left. Sunset painted the city outside in shades of orange and gold. Elena gathered her belongings and stepped outside. Halfway down the block she stopped. Across the street stood the same man. This time there was no umbrella, no rain, no crowd large enough to hide him. He stood beside a black sedan, hands in his coat pockets, tall, well-dressed, completely still. Elena could not see his face clearly from that distance, but she knew it was him, the strange observer who seemed to appear whenever she least expected it. For several seconds neither moved. Traffic passed between them, headlights flashed, the city buzzed around them, then a delivery truck pulled to the curb. When it finally moved again, the man was gone. Elena released a breath she had not realized she was holding. That evening she told her grandmother about it while helping prepare dinner. Her grandmother listened patiently before smiling. "Maybe somebody thinks you are interesting," Elena rolled her eyes. "That is not helping. Maybe it is coincidence." 3 times? Chicago has nearly 3 million people. Her grandmother shrugged. Stranger things have happened. Elena wanted to believe that. She truly did. Yet later that night, as she lay awake listening to distant traffic outside her apartment window, the image kept returning. The dark coat, the calm posture, the feeling that she was somehow being observed. What she did not know was that less than 2 miles away, another conversation was taking place. Maria Moretti sat comfortably in a leather chair while her son reviewed several documents spread across a conference table. Evening light filled the room. The city skyline glowed beyond the glass walls. "You are still watching her," Maria said. Vincent Moretti looked up briefly. "I am gathering information. That sounds much colder, because it is." Maria smiled knowingly. "And what have you learned?" Vincent closed the folder in front of him. "She volunteers at a community center twice a month. She spends most weekends helping her grandmother. She donates part of her paycheck to a physical therapy fund for patients who cannot afford treatment." Maria's smile widened. "Interesting." Vincent leaned back slightly. "Interesting does not prove anything." "Perhaps not." Maria rose from her chair and walked toward the window. Below them, city lights stretched for miles. "But some people are exactly who they appear to be." Vincent said nothing. His silence lingered for several moments. Finally, Maria turned back toward him. "You still do not believe that, do you?" Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. A message had arrived from one of his security personnel. The update was brief. Elena Bennett had just left her apartment building and was heading toward the neighborhood bookstore she visited every Friday evening. Vincent glanced at the message, then toward the city beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, Elena continued living her ordinary life, completely unaware of the attention surrounding her. Unfortunately for her, the next time she saw the mysterious man watching from a distance, he would not disappear before she got a closer look. Some encounters feel accidental right up until the moment they stop feeling accidental. Friday evening settled gently over Chicago as Elena Bennett stepped out of the neighborhood bookstore carrying a paperback novel tucked beneath her arm. The air smelled faintly of rain, even though streetlights flickered on one by one, casting warm pools of gold across the sidewalks. The city felt calmer than usual, slower. For the first time all week, Elena allowed herself to relax. She crossed the street toward a small coffee shop she visited whenever she needed a quiet hour before going home. The familiar bell above the door chimed as she entered. Soft jazz drifted through the room. A few students worked on laptops near the windows. An older couple shared a slice of cheesecake in the corner. Everything felt ordinary, comfortable. Elena ordered a tea and found an empty table near the back. She had barely opened her book when the chair across from her moved. The sound made her glance up. Her breath caught instantly. The man from the sidewalk, the man from outside Umbrella. He stood only a few feet away now. Up close, he looked different from what she had imagined. Taller, more polished. Dark hair brushed neatly back from a strong face. A charcoal coat rested over an expensive black suit. His posture carried a quiet confidence that drew attention without demanding it. Most striking were his eyes, calm, focused. The eyes of someone who rarely looked uncertain about anything. "May I sit?" he asked. His voice was low and measured. Elena stared for a second longer than she intended. "Do I know you?" A faint smile appeared. "Not yet." It was not exactly an answer. Elena closed her book. The smile disappeared. Observing, not following. That sounds worse. To her surprise, he actually laughed. It was brief, but genuine. Fair point. For several seconds, neither spoke. The noise of the coffee shop continued around them. Cups clinked softly. Milk steamed behind the counter. Somewhere near the front, someone laughed at a joke. Yet the space around their table seemed strangely isolated from the rest of the room. "Who are you?" Elena finally asked. "Vincent Moretti." The name meant nothing to her. She studied his face, searching for recognition that never arrived. Vincent seemed to notice. "That is probably for the best." "For the best?" "Most people who know my name already have an opinion about me." Elena folded her arms. "And what opinion should I have?" Vincent leaned back slightly. "That depends. On what? Whether you believe first impressions are accurate." The answer only made him more mysterious. Elena found herself becoming increasingly frustrated. "You still have not explained why you keep appearing everywhere." Vincent glanced toward the window where city lights reflected against the glass. "Sometimes life places certain people in your path for a reason." That sounds like something from a greeting card. This time the smile returned, larger than before. "You are not easily impressed." Was I supposed to be? For the first time, Vincent seemed genuinely interested, not amused. Interested. As though she had said something unexpected. Before he could respond, another voice interrupted. "There you are." Elena turned and immediately recognized Maria Moretti approaching their table. The older woman looked delighted. "I had a feeling you two would eventually meet." Elena blinked in surprise. Her gaze shifted between them, then back again. "You know each other?" Maria raised an eyebrow. "Of course we do." Vincent stood and pulled out a chair for his mother. The gesture was effortless, natural. Elena watched it carefully. Suddenly pieces began fitting together. The black SUV, the suited driver, the expensive clothing, the familiar last name. "Wait," Elena said slowly. "You are her son?" Maria smiled warmly. "I am." Elena looked back toward Vincent. "You are Maria's son, guilty." A strange mixture of relief and confusion washed through her. At least one mystery had been answered, unfortunately. Several others immediately took its place. Maria settled into her chair. "I hope Vincent has not frightened you. I am still deciding." Vincent shook his head slightly while Maria laughed. The easy interaction between them felt surprisingly normal. Nothing like the dramatic explanation Elena had imagined. Yet something still felt hidden beneath the surface. Something neither of them was saying. As the conversation continued, Elena noticed another detail. Every employee who passed their table seemed to recognize Vincent. Others looked away entirely. Nobody approached him casually. Nobody treated him like an ordinary customer. The realization sent a faint chill through her. She did not know who Vincent Moretti truly was, but she knew one thing with certainty. He was far more important than he wanted her to believe, and as she watched him quietly listening to his mother speak, Elena found herself wondering why a man like him had spent weeks watching a woman like her. The more Elena Bennett learned about Vincent Moretti, the less she felt she understood him. 3 days had passed since their unexpected meeting at the coffee shop. Life appeared normal on the surface. She went to work, she helped patients, she checked on her grandmother every evening, yet Vincent's presence lingered in the back of her mind like a question she could not answer. On Tuesday afternoon, that question became even more complicated. The rehabilitation clinic was unusually busy when Elena received a phone call from her grandmother's assisted living facility. The moment she heard the nurse's voice, her stomach tightened. Nothing serious had happened, but her grandmother had experienced dizziness during a routine walk, and the facility recommended a precautionary evaluation at a nearby hospital. Elena left work immediately. Chicago traffic crawled beneath gray skies as she drove across the city. Every red light felt longer than usual. Every minute felt important. By the time she reached the hospital, anxiety had settled heavily across her shoulders. Fortunately, her grandmother appeared calm when Elena arrived. She sat comfortably in a hospital bed reading a magazine as though nothing unusual had happened. Relief washed through Elena immediately. "You scared me," she said. Her grandmother smiled. "I am still here, sweetheart." A doctor entered moments later carrying a chart. He reviewed several test results before offering reassuring news. Everything looked stable. Additional monitoring would continue overnight, but there were no immediate concerns. Elena finally relaxed. Then she noticed something unusual. The doctor hesitated before leaving the room. "There is one more thing," he said. "Your grandmother's follow-up treatments have already been arranged." Elena frowned. "Arranged by who?" The doctor glanced at the paperwork. "A private sponsor." Confusion replaced relief. "What sponsor?" "I do not know the details, only that all future expenses have been covered." Elena stared at him. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake." The doctor offered a polite smile before leaving. The room fell silent. Elena slowly turned toward her grandmother. "Did you do this? With what money?" her grandmother asked. A fair point. Neither of them had the resources for something like that. Elena spent the next hour speaking with administrators, nurses, and billing representatives. Every answer led nowhere. The costs had been paid, the paperwork was complete. The sponsor had requested anonymity. That should have ended the mystery. Instead, it made Elena even more suspicious. As evening settled outside, she stepped into the hospital parking garage. Cool air drifted through the concrete structure. Headlights reflected across polished floors. She had almost reached her car when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "How is she doing?" Elena stopped instantly. Vincent Moretti stood several feet away. His dark coat hung neatly over a black suit. The fluorescent lights overhead cast soft shadows across his face. He looked completely out of place in a hospital parking garage, yet somehow he also looked as though he belonged anywhere he chose to stand. Elena folded her arms. Vincent did not answer immediately. "Your grandmother is all right?" "How did you know?" she repeated. His expression remained calm. "Too calm, I asked first." Elena stared at him for several seconds. Then realization arrived like a slow-moving storm. "You paid for it." Vincent looked away briefly toward the rows of parked vehicles. Silence stretched between them. That silence was answer enough. "Why?" Elena asked. "Because she needed help. Lots of people need help." "I know." His voice remained steady. "Then why my grandmother?" Vincent studied her face carefully before responding. "Because your grandmother matters to someone who matters to my mother." Elena blinked. Of all the explanations she expected, that was not one of them. "Maria asked you to do this? She worries about people. Most people do not solve their worries with hospital sponsorships." For the first time, a faint smile appeared. "You are learning quickly." Elena shook her head. Frustration mixed with gratitude in a way she could not untangle. Part of her wanted to thank him, another part wanted to demand answers. Instead, she asked the question that had bothered her from the beginning. "Who are you really?" Vincent's expression changed slightly, not dramatically, just enough for her to notice. The smile disappeared. The warmth faded. For a brief moment she glimpsed something guarded beneath the surface, something carefully hidden. "Someone who owes a great deal to his mother," he said quietly. Then he stepped aside and opened the driver's door of her car before she could react. "Drive safely, Elena." It was a simple gesture, polite, ordinary. Yet somehow it left her more unsettled than anything else. As she drove away, she glanced into her rearview mirror. Vincent remained standing exactly where she had left him, motionless beneath the cold hospital lights, watching her disappear into the night. And for the first time since all of this had begun, Elena realized something that made her pulse quicken. Vincent Moretti did not merely know her name. Somehow he seemed to know far more about her life than he ever should have. By the following week, Elena Bennett had reached a conclusion she never expected to make. Vincent Moretti was either the most generous man she had ever met or the most confusing. Every time she thought she understood his intentions, something happened that made less sense than before. Monday began with an unexpected phone call from the community center where Elena volunteered twice a month. She almost ignored it while reviewing patient files during her lunch break. Fortunately, she answered. "Elena, you are not going to believe this," the director said. "A donor just funded our physical therapy assistance program for the entire year." Elena smiled immediately. "That is amazing. It is unbelievable. We have enough funding to help every family on our waiting list." After ending the call, she sat quietly for several moments. The timing felt suspiciously familiar. Over the next few days, more strange coincidences followed. A wheelchair-accessible transportation service suddenly expanded coverage to include several of her patients who had struggled for months to reach appointments. A local equipment supplier donated rehabilitation devices the clinic desperately needed. Even her grandmother noticed the pattern. "Good things seem to be happening around you lately," she observed one evening over dinner. Elena stared down at her plate. "That is exactly what worries me." Her grandmother smiled knowingly. "You think it is him?" Elena did not answer. She did not need to. Deep down, she already suspected the truth. The problem was that she could not prove it. Vincent never claimed responsibility for anything. He never appeared asking for gratitude. Every act of help arrived anonymously, quietly, as though someone was rearranging pieces of the world without wanting credit. On Thursday evening, Elena finally decided she needed answers. She called Maria Moretti. The older woman answered immediately. "Elena, sweetheart, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Does your son always solve problems that nobody asked him to solve?" Maria laughed softly. "That depends. On what? Whether he believes the problem deserves solving." Elena rubbed her forehead. "That is not an answer." "No," Maria agreed. "It is not." They spoke for nearly 20 minutes, yet somehow Elena finished the conversation with more questions than before. The next afternoon, she left work later than usual. The sun had already started sinking behind the Chicago skyline. Golden light reflected from glass buildings while long shadows stretched across the sidewalks. As she crossed a busy intersection, movement on the opposite side of the street caught her attention. A familiar black SUV waited at the curb. Elena slowed her pace instinctively. The vehicle's rear door opened. Even from half a block away, Elena recognized the silver hair immediately. Maria Moretti. Elena smiled automatically. Then the second figure emerged from the vehicle. Vincent. He walked around the front of the SUV and held the door for his mother while speaking quietly. The scene lasted only seconds, yet something about it stopped Elena completely. Until now, Maria and Vincent had existed in separate parts of her mind. One was the kind older woman from the train. The other was the mysterious man whose influence seemed to reach everywhere. Seeing them together transformed both images at once. She watched as Maria adjusted Vincent's collar with a mother's familiar gesture. Vincent endured it with visible patience. Maria said something that made him shake his head. Then, unexpectedly, both of them laughed. The moment felt startlingly normal, human, real, not the version of Vincent she had imagined. Not the powerful stranger surrounded by secrets, just a son standing beside his mother. Unfortunately for Elena, she remained too far away to hear what they were saying. Before she could decide whether to approach them, a city bus rolled between her and the SUV. By the time it passed, the vehicle was already pulling away from the curb. Elena stood motionless beneath the fading sunlight. Her heartbeat felt strangely uneven, not from fear, not even from confusion. Something else, something she was not ready to name. Then her phone vibrated. A text message appeared from an unknown number. There were only 6 words on the screen. "We should probably talk soon." Beneath the message sat a single name. Vincent. Some truths answer one question only to create 10 more. Elena Bennett stared at the text message for nearly a full minute before responding. The screen glowed softly in the darkness of her apartment. Outside, Chicago traffic hummed beneath distant streetlights. Her grandmother had already gone to bed. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Finally, Elena typed 3 simple words. About what exactly? The reply arrived less than a minute later. About the train. Her pulse quickened immediately. Every strange coincidence, every unanswered question. Every appearance by Vincent and Maria seemed to pull together into a single moment. The train. The message continued. "Tomorrow, lunch. I will send the address." Elena barely slept that night. The following afternoon, she found herself standing outside a historic mansion overlooking Lake Michigan. The property looked less like a private home and more like something from an old movie. Iron gates framed the entrance. Tall trees lined the driveway. Beyond them stood a limestone building surrounded by carefully maintained gardens. Elena checked the address twice to make sure she had not made a mistake. She had not. A member of the household staff greeted her at the door and escorted her inside. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows. Polished floors reflected crystal chandeliers overhead. Yet despite the luxury surrounding her, the atmosphere felt surprisingly warm. Not cold, not intimidating, almost lived in. Elena followed the staff member through a long hallway until she reached a glass-covered sunroom overlooking the lake. Maria Moretti sat at a small table near the windows. A pot of tea rested between 2 empty chairs. The older woman's face brightened immediately. "Maria." Elena smiled despite her nervousness. You wanted to see me? Maria gestured toward the chair beside her. Sit. Elena took her seat. For a few moments neither spoke. Wind moved gently through the trees outside. Sunlight danced across the water beyond the glass. Finally, Maria poured Newt's tea into 2 cups. Elena laughed softly. That might be the understatement of the year. Maria nodded. Fair enough. Her expression grew thoughtful. Do you remember what I told you on the train? Elena thought back carefully. You said not to let the city convince me that kindness does not matter. Exactly. Maria folded her hands together. Most people do not realize how rare kindness has become when nobody expects a reward. Elena remained silent. She sensed something important approaching, something she had been waiting weeks to hear. Maria continued. I ride public transportation more often than my son likes, sometimes because I enjoy it, sometimes because it reminds me what real life looks like. A small smile appeared, and sometimes because I enjoy proving him wrong. Elena frowned slightly. Wrong about what? Maria looked toward the lake before answering. Vincent believes most people are motivated by self-interest. The answer surprised her. That sounds cynical. It is. Maria nodded. Life taught him that lesson many years ago. Elena listened carefully. And then I met you. Maria's eyes softened. A tired young woman on a crowded train who gave up her seat without hesitation. No cameras, no audience, no reason to expect anything in return. Understanding slowly began forming inside Elena's mind. The pieces were finally connecting. You told Vincent without hesitation. Why? Maria smiled gently. Because I wanted him to meet someone who might remind him that goodness still exists. Elena stared at her. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Wait, she sat back in her chair. All of this started because you told your son about a seat on a train? Maria laughed softly. Not exactly. Then what? The older woman reached across the table and squeezed Elena's hand. Elena looked down at their joined hands. A strange mixture of emotions filled her chest. Relief, confusion, gratitude, disbelief. The mystery of Maria's connection to Vincent had finally been solved. She was not simply connected to him. She was the reason any of this had happened at all. Unfortunately, one question still remained, the biggest question of all. Elena slowly lifted her eyes. Maria, yes? If all you did was tell him about me. Her voice softened. Then why does Vincent seem to know so much? For the first time all afternoon, Maria's smile faded. Not completely, just enough for Elena to notice. The older woman looked toward the doorway behind her, then back at Elena. Because, she said quietly, that part of the story is not quite as simple as you think. Eleanor Bennett left the Moretti estate with a storm inside her chest. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Birds drifted across the water. Everything outside looked peaceful. Yet her thoughts felt anything but peaceful. Maria's final words repeated themselves during the entire drive home. That part of the story is not quite as simple as you think. By evening, Elena could not ignore the feeling any longer. She sent Vincent a message. We need to talk. The reply arrived almost immediately. Name the place. 2 hours later, they met on a rooftop terrace overlooking downtown Chicago. The city glowed beneath them. Thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. Traffic moved through the streets like rivers of gold. Cool wind swept across the rooftop, carrying the distant sounds of the city below. Vincent stood near the railing when Elena arrived. Dark suit, hands in his pockets, calm as always. For a moment, she simply looked at him. The man who had appeared in her life like a mystery, the man who somehow seemed connected to every unanswered question. Maria told me the truth about the train, Elena said. Vincent nodded. I assumed she would eventually. She told me she asked you to find me. She did. Elena took another step closer. What she did not explain was how you knew everything. Vincent remained silent. The wind tugged gently at his jacket. My grandmother, my volunteer work, my schedule, the hospital, the clinic. Elena's voice sharpened. You knew things you should not have known. Vincent looked away toward the skyline. Yes, how? The silence that followed felt heavier than anything they had shared before. Finally, Vincent answered, I looked into your life. What does that mean? Exactly what it sounds like. The words landed harder than she expected. For several seconds, she could only process them. You investigated me? Vincent met her eyes directly. Yes, there was no excuse. No attempt to soften the truth. Just how that made it worse. Elena folded her arms tightly across her chest. Why? Because my mother asked me to find you. Finding someone is not the same as investigating them. No? Then why do it? Vincent exhaled slowly. Because I wanted to know if you were real. Real? People are different when someone is watching. His voice remained steady. People perform kindness. They perform generosity. They perform compassion. At first, yes. The answer stung more than she expected. Elena looked away toward the city lights. The betrayal settled slowly into place. Every coincidence, every appearance, every mysterious act of help. None of it had been random. She had been observed, evaluated, judged. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Since the train." Elena laughed once. The sound carried no amusement. "Unbelievable." Vincent remained motionless. "You followed me for weeks. I never approached you until I had enough answers to know whether my mother was right." Elena shook her head. "And was she?" Another pause, this one shorter, simpler. "Yes." The sincerity in his voice only complicated her anger. She wanted to be furious. Part of her was. Yet another part remembered the hospital, her grandmother, the community center, the countless people helped along the way. None of it erased what he had done, but it prevented her from reducing him to a villain. Unfortunately, that made everything harder. "You had no right," she said. "I know. Do you?" "Yes." The answer came without defense, without argument, without pride. For the first time since she met him, Vincent Moretti looked uncertain, human, fallible. "I spent most of my life believing people eventually reveal selfish motives," he said quietly. "I expected to find yours." Elena stared at him, and instead Vincent's gaze held hers. The city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. "Instead, I found exactly what my mother saw on that train." Neither spoke for several seconds. Wind swept across the rooftop. Somewhere below, a siren echoed through the city. Elena felt anger, disappointment, hurt. Yet beneath all of it lived something more complicated. Understanding, not forgiveness. Not yet, just understanding. Finally, she stepped back. "I need time." Elena turned toward the exit. Halfway there, she stopped. Without looking back, she asked the question that had suddenly become impossible to ignore. "How many things in my life happened because of you?" The silence behind her lasted several seconds longer than before, and when Vincent finally answered, his voice carried something she had never heard from him until that moment: regret, more than you realize. Sometimes the hardest part of learning the truth is discovering that the truth is even bigger than the lie. Elena Bennett spent the next several days avoiding Vincent Moretti completely. She ignored his messages. She declined invitations from Maria. She buried herself in work and convinced herself that distance would make everything easier. It did not. Every unanswered question continued following her through the city. Every memory felt different now. The train, the coffee shop, the hospital, the community center. Nothing looked the same after learning she had been quietly investigated. On Saturday afternoon, Elena finished a volunteer shift at the community center and stepped outside into crisp autumn air. Children played basketball in a nearby park. Leaves drifted across the sidewalks in shades of gold and red. For the first time all week, she felt calm. Then she noticed a familiar figure sitting alone on a bench across the street, Maria Moretti. The older woman smiled the moment their eyes met. Elena considered walking away. Instead, she crossed the street. "You planned this," Elena said. Maria laughed softly. "Perhaps." Elena sat beside her. For several moments neither spoke. The city moved around them while silence settled comfortably between them. Finally Maria sighed. "He handled it badly. That is one way to describe it. But he was honest." Elena looked toward the park. "Only after he got caught." "Fair criticism." Another silence followed. Then Maria reached into her purse and removed a small envelope. "You should see this." Elena hesitated before accepting it. Inside were several pages. Notes, dates, reports. She began reading. The first entry described the day on the train. The second mentioned her volunteer work. Another documented a donation she had quietly made to help a patient pay for rehabilitation equipment. Another described how she spent weekends helping her grandmother. Elena turned page after page. At first anger returned, then confusion, then something else. None of the notes focused on mistakes. None searched for weaknesses. They focused entirely on moments of kindness. Moments nobody would normally notice. "What is this?" Elena asked quietly. Maria looked toward investigation. Elena frowned. "This is all he looked for?" "At first, no." Maria smiled sadly. "At first he expected to find reasons not to trust you." Elena lowered her eyes back to the pages. There were dozens of entries, small observations, simple moments, helping strangers, staying late at work, supporting patients after difficult days. Acts so ordinary she barely remembered some of them herself. Then she reached the final page. The last entry contained only one sentence: "Subject remains consistent regardless of circumstance." Elena stared at the words. Something tightened in her chest. "He wrote this?" Maria nodded. 3 weeks. Elena looked away. Suddenly she understood something she had missed before. This had never been a test she knew she was taking. Every choice had been genuine because she never realized anyone was watching. "Why?" she whispered. "Because my son does not trust easily. That does not justify it." "No," Maria's answer came immediately. "It does not." The honesty caught Elena off guard. The older woman continued. "What it does explain is why he changed." Elena frowned. "Changed? You think all those donations happened because I asked?" Maria shook her head. "I only asked him to find you." Elena looked back at the pages. "Then who paid for everything?" "Vincent. Because of me? Because of what he learned from you?" The words settled heavily between them. For the first time, Elena saw the situation from another angle. Vincent had investigated her. That was wrong. Yet somewhere during that process, something unexpected had happened. The person being observed had changed the observer. The realization left her strangely quiet. As the afternoon sun dipped lower across the city, Maria stood and adjusted her coat. "He is not perfect, Elena. I know. Neither are you." A small smile appeared despite herself. "That is definitely true." Maria squeezed her hand gently. "Then perhaps stop asking whether he made mistakes." Elena looked up. "And start asking what he learned from them." With that, Maria walked away. Elena remained on the bench holding the folder in her lap. The wind rustled through the trees overhead. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. For a long moment she simply sat there staring at the final page. Unfortunately for her, she still did not know the biggest truth of all. Because at that exact moment, less than a mile away, Vincent Moretti was preparing to tell her something he had never admitted to anyone before. The following Tuesday arrived with a kind of clear autumn sky that made Chicago look almost gentle. Elena Bennett spent the morning at the clinic, but her thoughts remained elsewhere. The folder Maria had given her sat inside her bag. She had read it 3 times. Each time the same conclusion emerged. Vincent Moretti had crossed a line, yet somehow the person most changed by the investigation appeared to be Vincent himself. Late that afternoon, Elena finished her final appointment and stepped outside. A cold breeze carried leaves across the sidewalk. Her phone vibrated almost immediately. One message. "Can we talk? No pressure, no expectations, just honesty, Vincent." Elena stared at the screen for several seconds before typing a simple response. 1 hour. Riverside Park. The sun was beginning to set when she arrived. Orange light spilled across the river. Joggers passed along the walking paths. A few boats drifted slowly through the water. Everything felt calm, normal. Vincent was already there. He stood near the railing overlooking the river, hands resting lightly on the metal barrier. He looked less guarded than usual, less like a man in control of every situation. As Elena approached, he turned toward her. "Thank you for coming. I almost did not." Vincent nodded. "I would not have blamed you." For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt different from previous meetings, less tense, more honest. Finally, Elena looked directly at him. "Maria gave me the file." A faint smile touched his face. "I figured she would." "You kept records on everything, not everything enough." Vincent accepted that criticism without argument. The river reflected golden light beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the city. Elena folded her arms. "What exactly were you trying to prove?" "At first, yes, that my mother was wrong." Elena blinked. The answer surprised her. "You wanted her to be wrong? I expected her to be wrong." His voice remained calm. "There is a difference," Elena considered that. "And why did you expect that?" Vincent released a slow breath. "Because I spent years watching people become different when money entered the room." He glanced toward her. "Different when power entered the room." The honesty in his voice made it difficult to look away. "People lie, Elena. They pretend. They become whoever they think they need to become. Not everyone. I know that now." The words settled quietly between them. Elena studied him carefully. There was no arrogance behind the statement, no pride. "Just simple truth," Vincent continued. "Every time we checked, the result stayed the same." Elena shook her head slightly. "You make it sound like some kind of experiment." A shadow of regret crossed his expression. "That is exactly what I am ashamed of." The answer caught her off guard. Vincent looked away briefly before continuing. "You deserve to be treated like a person. Instead, I treated you like a question." The river wind stirred his coat. For the first time since meeting him, Elena sensed completely genuine beneath his carefully controlled exterior, vulnerability. "Then why keep helping people?" she asked quietly. "The clinic, the community center, the transportation services." Vincent smiled faintly. "Because somewhere along the way I stopped trying to learn about you." He paused. "And started learning from you." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, small, subtle, but real. The anger that had dominated the previous week no longer felt as sharp. It still existed, yet understanding had begun to grow beside it. They walked slowly along the river path as daylight faded. For nearly an hour they talked. Not about investigations, not about secrets, about ordinary things, childhood memories, family traditions, favorite books. The conversation felt surprisingly easy, as though they were finally meeting for the first time without mystery standing between them. Eventually they reached a small overlook where city lights reflected across the dark water. Vincent stopped walking. "There is something else I should tell you." Elena looked at him carefully. "More secrets?" "No." A faint smile appeared. "The opposite." The expression disappeared almost immediately. His gaze shifted toward the skyline. "Last month I was offered a business opportunity that would have expanded several of my operations." Elena listened quietly. "I turned it down." "Why?" Vincent looked directly at her. "Because the project would have displaced hundreds of families from a neighborhood they could not afford to leave." Elena stared at him. "You walked away from that?" "Yes." "Because of me?" Vincent thought for several seconds before answering. "Because for the first time in a very long time I started asking a different question." "Which question?" The city lights shimmered behind him as evening settled across Chicago. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost thoughtful. Not whether something could be done. His eyes held hers steadily, but whether it should be done. Some people spend years building walls so high that they forget what exists on the other side. A week passed after the conversation by the river. The tension between Elena Bennett and Vincent Moretti no longer felt like a storm waiting to break. It felt like something quieter, something unfinished. They spoke more often now, sometimes through messages, sometimes over coffee, sometimes during long walks through different parts of the city. Yet one question continued lingering in Elena's mind. She understood what Vincent had done. She even understood why. What she still did not understand was how a kindness was rare in the first place. The answer arrived on a grey Sunday morning. Vincent called unexpectedly. "I want to show you something." Elena glanced out her apartment window. Low clouds hung over Chicago. His voice sounded unusually serious. An hour later they drove north through quiet streets lined with autumn trees. Neither spoke much during the trip. Soft music played through the speakers. Outside, leaves drifted across sidewalks damp from overnight rain. Eventually Vincent turned through the gates of an old cemetery overlooking Lake Michigan. Elena looked at him curiously but said nothing. They walked together along a narrow stone path bordered by rows of weathered monuments. Wind moved gently through the trees overhead. The world felt still, respectful. Vincent finally stopped before a simple granite headstone. Elena lowered her eyes and read the inscription, "Anthony Moretti, beloved husband, beloved father." For several moments neither spoke. Then Vincent slipped his hands into his coat pockets and stared at the name carved into stone. "My father." Elena looked back toward him. The expression on his face was unlike anything she had seen before. There was no confidence, no mystery, no control, only memory. "He died when I was 21, Vincent said quietly. "Old enough to think I understood the world, young enough to realize I understood nothing." The wind carried his words across the silent cemetery. Elena listened carefully. "My father trusted people too easily." A faint smile touched his face. "At least that is what I used to tell myself." He looked down at the headstone. He believed most kindness mattered. Elena remained silent. Vincent continued. "After he died, I watched people change. Friends disappeared. Business partners became strangers. Promises vanished." His gaze drifted toward the lake beyond the trees. "Every year it became easier to assume the worst about people." Elena understood now, not completely, but enough. The investigation, the skepticism, the need to verify every act of kindness. It had begun years earlier beside a grave. "Maria never stopped believing," Elena said softly. Vincent laughed once. "No, she never did." For the first time that morning, warmth entered his voice. "My mother has spent decades proving me wrong." Nearby, leaves rustled across the grass. A distant church bell echoed through the cold air. Eventually, Elena looked at him. "And then you met me." Vincent smiled faintly. "Technically, I met you weeks after my mother did, Yoon." The smile lingered, then slowly faded. Yes, Elena watched him carefully. Something had changed. She could feel it. The conversation was moving towards something important. Something Vincent rarely allowed himself to say. He turned fully toward her. The wind lifted a few strands of hair across her face. For a moment, neither looked away. "Do you know what surprised me most?" he asked. Elena shook her head. "Not that you were kind." His voice remained calm. honest, not that you were generous, not even that you stayed the same when nobody was watching. He paused. It was that you never seemed to believe any of it made you special. Elena looked down briefly, because it does not. Vincent smiled. Exactly. The answer seemed to matter more to him than she understood. Several seconds passed. Then Vincent took a slow breath. Most people spend their lives trying to be noticed. His eyes held hers. You spent yours noticing everyone else. The words settled quietly between them. Elena felt her heartbeat quicken, not from surprise, from recognition. Somehow this moment felt different from every conversation before it. More vulnerable, more real. Vincent glanced once toward his father's grave, then back toward her. When he spoke again, his voice was almost impossibly steady. I brought you here because this is the one place I cannot lie to myself. Elena said nothing. She simply waited. Vincent's gaze never left hers. The cemetery around them seemed to disappear. The city disappeared, the wind disappeared. There was only the truth standing between them. And finally, after weeks of secrets, mistakes, forgiveness, and understanding, Vincent Moretti said the words he had never planned to say to anyone. Elena, I love you. For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. The wind still moved through the cemetery. Leaves still drifted across the grass. Somewhere in the distance, traffic continued flowing through the city, yet none of it reached Elena Bennett. She stood beside Vincent Moretti, staring into his eyes as the words settled between them, I love you. They were not dramatic words. They were not delivered with grand gestures or rehearsed perfection. If anything, their power came from how simple they sounded. Honest, unprotected, real. Elena lowered her gaze briefly. Her heartbeat felt impossibly loud. She had imagined this moment more than once over the previous weeks. Yet standing here now, she realized no version she imagined had captured what it actually felt like. Vincent waited quietly. He did not step closer. He did not pressure her for an answer. He simply stood there, allowing her the space to decide what she felt. That alone told her how much he had changed. Finally, she looked back up. You really make things complicated, do you know that? A faint smile touched Vincent's face. I have been told. Elena laughed softly despite herself. The tension eased slightly, not completely, just enough for both of them to breathe again. When I first met you, she said, I thought you were one of the strangest people I had ever encountered. Only one of them? Vincent asked. Do not interrupt. Sorry. Elena shook her head. Then I found out you had been investigating me. Vincent's expression grew serious again. I know, I was angry. I know that too, and disappointed. I deserved that. The immediate acceptance removed any temptation to continue arguing. Vincent never tried defending what he had done. He never searched for excuses. Somehow that mattered more than she expected. Elena took a slow breath. But somewhere along the way, something happened. Vincent remained silent. I stopped seeing the man who investigated me. Her eyes softened, and started seeing the man who learned from it. The words seemed to affect him more deeply than she intended. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his expression. Hope too. Quiet hope. Elena. She stepped closer before he could continue, not dramatically, just enough to erase the distance that had existed between them for so long. You changed, Vincent. Her voice remained gentle. Not because I asked you to. Not because your mother wanted you to. She smiled faintly. You changed because you chose to. The cemetery around them felt peaceful now, no longer heavy with old memories, no longer burdened by unanswered questions, just peaceful. Vincent looked toward his father's grave briefly before returning his attention to her. My father used to say something. Elena waited. He said the people who change your life are rarely the people you expect. A small laugh escaped her. Your father sounds wise. He was. Silence settled between them once more. This time it felt comfortable, warm, the kind of silence shared between people who no longer needed to hide anything. Over the next several weeks, life moved forward. Elena continued working at the clinic. Vincent continued overseeing his businesses, yet their lives gradually intertwined in ways that felt surprisingly natural. Maria seemed delighted by every development. Elena's grandmother approved almost immediately after meeting Vincent properly. Even the city itself appeared different, less crowded, less anonymous. As winter approached, Chicago transformed beneath strings of holiday lights and early snowfall. One evening, Vincent invited Elena to walk along the lakeshore. The air was cold enough to turn every breath visible. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky. The lake stretched dark and endless beside them. They stopped near a quiet overlook where city lights reflected across the water. Elena rested her hands inside her coat pockets. You have been unusually quiet tonight, Vincent smiled. I was thinking, dangerous habit. Probably. He reached into his coat pocket. Elena immediately noticed the small box. Her breath caught. Vincent laughed softly at her expression. "You figured it out quickly. You are holding a ring box. Fair point." The city lights shimmered behind him as he opened it. A simple diamond rested inside, elegant, understated, beautiful. Nothing about it felt excessive. Nothing felt designed to impress. It felt personal, intentional. Vincent looked at her with the same honesty she had first seen beside his father's grave. "I spent years believing that power could solve every problem." His voice remained steady. Then a woman on a crowded train stood up so somebody else could sit down. Elena felt tears gathering despite her best effort to stop them. Vincent smiled softly, and somehow that changed everything. He took a slow breath. "Elena Bennett, will you marry me?" The answer came before Vincent could finish asking the question. Elena Bennett smiled through tears she no longer bothered hiding and nodded. Yes, the word was small, simple, yet it carried enough weight to change both of their lives forever. Relief appeared across Vincent's face so quickly that it made her laugh. For a man who spent most of his life controlling every situation, he suddenly looked almost surprised by his own happiness. Snow drifted gently around them while city lights shimmered across the dark water. Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger. Then, for several seconds, neither spoke. They simply stood together beneath the winter sky, allowing the moment to become real. The months that followed passed faster than either of them expected. Spring arrived gradually. Snow melted from the sidewalks. Trees regained their color. The city emerged from winter one bright morning at a time. Their wedding was never the enormous event many people expected. Vincent could have filled a ballroom with hundreds of guests. Instead, they chose something smaller, something personal. A lakeside ceremony attended by family and close friends. Maria cried before the ceremony even started. Elena's grandmother cried through most of it. Vincent claimed he remained perfectly composed, though nobody believed him. The day itself felt almost unreal. Sunlight reflected across Lake Michigan. A soft breeze moved through rows of white flowers. For once there were no mysteries, no investigations, no misunderstandings. Only two people standing side by side, fully aware of who the other was and choosing each other anyway. That choice mattered more than anything else. Years later, Elena would still remember one particular moment from that afternoon. Not the vows, not the music, not even the ring. She remembered looking toward the front row and seeing Maria smiling through tears. The same woman she had once met on a crowded train. The same woman who had unknowingly changed the direction of her entire future. After the wedding, life settled into something neither Elena nor Vincent had expected. Peace, not perfect peace. Real life still brought challenges. Busy schedules, difficult days, unexpected problems, yet beneath everything existed a sense of stability neither had known before. Elena continued helping patients. Vincent continued running his businesses. Together they expanded the community programs that had become important to both of them. The rehabilitation fund grew, transportation services expanded, more families received help, more people found opportunities, yet Vincent never attached his name to any of it. That surprised many people. It surprised Elena most of all. One evening she finally asked why. Vincent smiled. "Because I finally learned something important." "What is that?" He glanced toward her. "The point of doing good is not being noticed for it." The answer sounded suspiciously familiar. Elena laughed immediately. "You stole that lesson from me." "Absolutely." The years continued moving forward. Some seasons arrived quietly, others arrived with celebration. Through all of them, one thing remained unchanged. Maria still preferred public transportation. No amount of persuasion from Vincent managed to stop her. One bright spring morning, several years after the wedding, Elena found herself riding a train through downtown Chicago beside Vincent and Maria. The city looked different now. New buildings reached toward the sky. New businesses filled old changed. The train car gradually filled at each stop. Commuters stepped aboard carrying coffee cups, backpacks, and briefcases. Conversations blended with the familiar rhythm of steel wheels against the tracks. Elena sat beside Vincent while Maria occupied the seat across from them. Sunlight flashed through the windows as the train moved between stations. At the next stop, an elderly woman entered the crowded car. She carried 2 shopping bags and looked tired. Elena immediately prepared to stand. Old habits never disappeared. Before she could move, something unexpected happened. A young boy sitting nearby jumped to his feet. He could not have been older than 10. "Ma'am," he said politely. "You can have my seat." The woman smiled in surprise. Around them, several passengers looked up from their phones. The elderly woman thanked him and carefully sat down. The boy simply shrugged as though the gesture required no recognition at all. Elena felt herself smiling. Across from her, Maria smiled too. Vincent noticed both expressions. "What?" he asked. Elena glanced toward the young boy, then toward the city passing outside the window. Finally, she looked back at her husband. Nothing. Her smile deepened, just something beautiful. The train continued forward beneath the morning sun. Around them, strangers returned to their conversations. The city carried on exactly as it always had. Yet Elena understood something now that she had not understood years earlier. Kindness rarely announces itself. It rarely arrives with applause. Most of the time it appears in ordinary moments. A seat offered to a stranger. A hand extended when nobody is watching, a small decision that seems insignificant at the time, and sometimes without anyone realizing it, that small decision changes everything.